Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, some people produce electricity with oil, but most do so using coal, because that is a far cheaper and more efficient way of doing it. We think that if the opening opposition want Malaysia to produce its electricity with oil, they are dooming it to being an economic cripple for a long time. Malaysia needs a lot of electricity. It needs a stable base, and importantly, it needs a base that won't be affected by the cost of carbon in the future. And it's for that reason the closing government will tell you that this is economically necessary for Malaysia's future. Before I get to that, 4 quick things in rebuttal. Firstly, input costs. The idea that creating a nuclear power plant costs a lot of money. Firstly, they're being built right now, so let's not pretend that those input costs haven't been sunk. We think importantly that even if the input costs exist now, the point is that it takes 10 to 15 years for these things to produce yield. 10 to 15 years down the track is exactly when oil and coal prices are going to start increasing. 10 to 15 years is exactly when we're probably going to find global consensus on whatever the 4th or 5th incarnation of Copenhagen is, and that is exactly when the cost of producing something using fossil fuels will skyrocket. That's why they have to invest in this now, not in 10 or 15 years, when then in 30 years they'll be able to find a low emission way of producing their goods. We think this is far worth it in terms of input costs. Second point of rebuttal, opportunity costs. We heard from the opening opposition that every dollar spent on nuclear power is a dollar not spent on alternative energies. We think that firstly, alternative energies are actually being more catered to by international markets in terms of development, right? We don't understand why it's going to be incumbent on Malaysia to produce the best in alternate energies when there are governments around the world subsidising those very alternate energies, when Malaysia could then import them at a cheaper rate. Importantly, we think that the reason that the Malaysian government and the Malaysian commercial sector is not investing heavily in alternate energies is because it can't provide baseload power. That isn't going to change anytime soon. Do you know what the problem with that is? They will never invest in something that doesn't provide baseload power. Nuclear power does. It means that if you have to rely on only one thing, you can rely on nuclear power, which is why the market will invest in it, which is why this is an important move to bridge the gap between fossil fuels and alternate energy sources when they are ready to produce at a baseload level. And we think that that's likely going to take anywhere between 50 and 100 years if you're talking about the best baseload alternate energy power sources. We think that for that reason, in the interim, we should invest in nuclear. Third point of rebuttal, these are inflexible power plants. Firstly, we think the opening opposition need to update their matter file. Nuclear power plants are smaller than they have ever been, and they continue to get smaller thanks to technological innovation. But also, you don't have to put them next to a city. You absolutely can move electricity, and the amount that you lose is very small. Nuclear power in particular is incredibly efficient. The amount that you get out of a certain, a tiny amount of uranium is so much. Nuclear power is so much more efficient than either coal or oil. We think for that reason, the inflexibility, even if it exists, isn't worth it. No, thank you. Final point of rebuttal, danger. We think this is just rubbish. The United States, the United Kingdom, Sweden, France, Japan, who is particularly sensitive about its nuclear past, all operate significant amounts of nuclear energy, right? No, seriously, if anyone was going to not adopt this model for danger, it would be them, right? All of those countries operate hundreds of nuclear power plants between them. And what did Tim tell us? France has 12 incidents a year which don't even make the news anywhere because they don't hurt anyone. We think technological developments, even in the treatment of waste, for example, Japanese technology to keep nuclear waste in ceramic balls that are much harder to leak or be accessed by nefarious actors like terrorists, we think all of those technological advancements can be utilised by Malaysia. So now I'm going to move on to our extension. No, thank you, which is that this is economically necessary. First reason why this is economically necessary for Malaysia, there is growing demand for electricity. What are the stats right now? At the moment in Malaysia, electricity production is 102.9 billion kilowatts. That's how much they're producing. How much are they consuming? 95.98 billion kilowatts. All right, I told a bit of a lie. That's not demand right now. That was demand in 2007, which is the most recent stats that we have. We are willing to believe that they're not producing a whole lot more because they're not idiots and they're not burning oil to produce it. We think that what's happening is that nice ice-cold electric heaters like this are increasing demand but not increasing production. Malaysia needs a whole lot of electricity because of where it is, but importantly, because of what it does.
Other point, sir?
No, thank you. Actually, I'll take you in a moment. What does Malaysia do? Its economy is developing in a particular way. That is, firstly, in a high-tech way that requires so much electricity, right? If you want to run any kind of outsourced IT industry that services the West, you need to guarantee baseload power. You can't have intermittent power. You can't say, maybe we'll rely on solar energy, because you won't get get investment for that. But secondly, they're trying to advance their manufacturing. It's no longer just selling palm and rubber oil. It's in fact manufacturing and developing that and then on-selling the value-added good. To do that, you need a lot of electricity. To invest in that, you need a lot of electricity. You need the guarantee of power to develop and invest. We don't think that coal and oil price shocks are guaranteed power sources.
Recognizing that Malaysia even struggles to maintain the standards on their buses that's seen about 5 bus accidents in the past 2 weeks, what are the chances that they can maintain the standards of security for these nuclear power plants?
We think that there's a slight difference in priority for the Malaysian government between buses, which in many cases are privately run, and like nuclear power plants. We think that if France and every single other country I mentioned can do it, there is no reason why Malaysia can't do it. If it's only a matter of spending money, Malaysia can and absolutely should spend money on this. And if there's some reason why Malaysia can't do something the United Kingdom can, you tell me why that is. Second point of extension, the cost of carbon. We think there's already a clear cost to carbon, which is to the environment, right? And that's not actually just an externality. That gets borne by the economy.
Sir.
No, thank you, sir. That gets borne by the economy when your workers are less productive, when sea levels rise, when your goods cost more to import. But we think, importantly, what Bronwyn called a secondary consideration is going to rapidly become a primary consideration. What is that? It might take some time, but the world is moving to a world where we are going to cost carbon. It's going to be either through the form of taxes and tariffs on carbon-laden imports or through carbon trading under some post-Copenhagen type deal. We think that, number one, reacting and adapting your economy to that kind of world where all of your exports suddenly cost a lot more takes a lot of time. It takes time that you should spend investing in now so that you don't have to do it in 10 or 15 years. So you already have a low-carbon way of developing electricity. But secondly, Malaysia needs a way to lower the carbon cost of its exports to remain competitive in the future, so that when whatever the version of the Copenhagen Agreement is that finally passes, that finally puts the cost on carbon actually exists, Malaysia is ready. It takes time to adapt an economy. If Malaysia doesn't want its exports to be suddenly costing every single cent, every single dollar more than countries that have invested in low carbon intensive energy like nuclear power, Malaysia must adapt now. This isn't an option, ladies and gentlemen, and this isn't something that we should allow niggling doubts about whether Australia will sell uranium or not to deter. We think this is an economic imperative that if Malaysia wants to survive and flourish, it must undertake.